They actually laughed when I walked into that courtroom. My own daughter, Patricia, and her husband, Michael, sitting there in their designer suits snickering like schoolchildren. When they saw me shuffle in with my old handbag and sensible shoes, Michael even elbowed the man next to him, probably cracking some joke about the confused old lady who thought she could defend herself. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. You see, 6 months ago, my husband Robert passed away and he left me everything. Every penny of his fortune, every investment, every property. Patricia expected to inherit millions. But Robert's will was crystal clear. It all went to his loving wife, Dorothy Hamilton. Not a single dollar to our ungrateful daughter. That's when Patricia decided I had to be mentally incompetent. After all, how else could a simple housewife end up with a $60 million estate? She hired lawyers and filed papers claiming I'd forged Robert's signature, that I'd manipulated a dying man. The documents painted me as a gold-digging wife who'd somehow tricked her way into an inheritance. I remember sitting in my kitchen that morning, reading the legal notice over my coffee. My own daughter was suing me claiming fraud and elder abuse. She wanted me declared mentally unfit so she could overturn Robert's will and take what she believed was rightfully hers. The irony was almost funny, you see. Patricia always saw me as just mom, the woman who packed her lunches, drove her to ballet lessons, and kept the house running while daddy worked. She never once asked about my life before marriage, never wondered why I had law books in my study, never questioned why judges occasionally sent me Christmas cards. Mrs. Hamilton, her lawyer, James Morrison, said during our deposition, speaking slowly, as if I were both deaf and stupid, "Can you explain to us how a woman with no legal background, no business experience, and no college degree came to possess such detailed knowledge of Mr. Hamilton's business affairs?" I smiled sweetly and told him I'd always been good with numbers. Let him think what he wanted. Now, sitting in that courtroom, watching my daughter's confident smirk, I almost felt sorry for what was about to happen. Patricia thought she was so clever, so prepared. She had no idea that her simple housewife mother had been reading legal briefs since before she was born. The bailiff called the court to order and Judge Margaret Walsh entered. The moment she saw me, her steps faltered slightly. Our eyes met, and I saw recognition flicker across her face. Patricia didn't notice to busy whispering with her lawyer about their slam dunk case against the incompetent old woman, but I was wrong about everything I thought I knew about that day. Let me take you back to where this really started, because the story didn't begin in that courtroom. It began the day Robert died. I was holding his hand when he passed, just like I had for 35 years of marriage. The doctors had given us 6 months, but Robert only lasted 3. "Cancer doesn't care about your wealth or your plans, Dorothy," he whispered in those final moments. "They're going to come for you. They think you don't know anything, but I made sure you'd be protected. Everything is yours, just like we discussed." I kissed his forehead and promised him I'd be fine. Robert knew me better than anyone, better than our daughter ever did. The reading of the will took place 2 weeks later at Robert's lawyer's office. Patricia arrived dressed in black, tissues ready, playing the grieving daughter perfectly. Michael stood beside her, already calculating their inheritance in his head. "To my beloved wife, Dorothy Hamilton," the lawyer read, "I leave my entire estate, including all properties, investments, bank accounts, and business holdings valued at approximately $62 million. The silence in that room was deafening. Patricia's tissue box hit the floor. "That's impossible," she said, her voice shaking. "Daddy promised me the house in Martha's Vineyard. He said I'd inherit the business. The will is quite clear, Mrs. Brooks," the lawyer replied. "Your father left you a family photo and his watch. To your husband, Michael, he left his golf clubs." I watched my daughter's face shift from grief to fury in seconds. "This isn't right," she snapped. "Mom doesn't know the first thing about managing money. She'll lose everything within a year." Michael's tone hardened. "We need to see those documents. This has to be some kind of mistake." But there was no mistake. Robert had been planning this for years, updating his will every time Patricia showed her true colors. Like when she borrowed $20,000 for a kitchen renovation and never paid it back. Or when she mocked my cooking at Michael's promotion party, calling it peasant food in front of his colleagues. Robert saw how they treated me, how they took me for granted. He knew they saw me as weak, incapable, undeserving of respect. After the lawyer's office, Patricia and Michael followed me home. They sat in my living room, the same room where I'd helped Patricia with her homework, celebrated her achievements, and comforted her through heartbreaks. "Mom, be reasonable," Patricia said, her voice honey sweet now. "You can't possibly manage all this money alone. Why don't you let Michael help you? He's good with finances." Michael nodded eagerly. "We could set up a trust. Make sure everything's handled properly. You wouldn't have to worry about any of it." I poured myself some tea with steady hands. I appreciate your concern, but I'm perfectly capable of managing my own affairs. Are you, though? Patricia's mask slipped slightly. Mom, you've never even balanced a checkbook. Daddy handled everything. That's when I realized what they were really planning. The lawsuit papers arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a serious young man who looked embarrassed to be serving a grandmother. Patricia hadn't wasted any time. I read through the petition while my coffee grew cold. According to the documents, I was suffering from dementia, had been manipulated by unknown parties into forging my husband's will, and posed a danger to myself through irrational financial decisions. The evidence they gathered was almost impressive in its creativity. They included receipts from when I'd gotten lost driving to Patricia's house last year. Clearly, in their eyes, a sign of cognitive decline rather than construction detours on unfamiliar roads. They noted my inability to operate modern technology because I'd once asked Patricia's teenager to help me set up Netflix. Most damaging of all was Michael's sworn statement, claiming I'd become increasingly paranoid and secretive about finances, refusing their helpful guidance in managing Robert's estate. My phone rang within an hour of receiving the papers. Patricia's number. Mom, I'm so sorry you had to find out this way, she said, not sounding sorry at all. We tried to talk to you reasonably, but you're just not capable of handling this responsibility. I see, I said calmly. The good news, she continued, is once the court declares you incompetent, Michael and I can take care of everything. You'll have a nice allowance, enough for your needs, and you won't have to worry about all those complicated investments and business decisions. I watched a bright red cardinal land on my bird feeder, remembering how Robert used to say cardinals brought good luck. And where exactly would I live during this arrangement? I asked. There was a pause. Well, the Martha's Vineyard house would be perfect for you. It's smaller, easier to maintain. We'd take the main house, of course, since we have more family obligations. Of course, they would. Patricia, I asked quietly, do you really believe I'm mentally incompetent? Mom, it's not about belief. It's about reality. You married Daddy when you were 25 and never had a career. You don't understand business or law or money management. This inheritance is too much for someone with your background, as if 30 years of marriage and motherhood had erased everything I'd been before. I understand you've hired James Morrison to represent you, I said. Her tone sharpened. How did you? She caught herself, then added quickly, see? This is exactly what I mean. You're becoming paranoid, suspicious. It's not healthy. After we hung up, I sat in Robert's study, surrounded by his books and awards. On his desk was a photo from our wedding day, me in my simple white dress, him looking at me like I held all the answers in the world. Robert knew this day would come. He tried to warn me that Patricia and Michael saw me as weak, as someone who'd contributed nothing of value to our marriage. I opened the desk drawer and pulled out the envelope Robert had given me 2 years ago. When they come for you, he'd said, and they will come for you. Open this. Inside was a business card and a handwritten note from Robert. Dorothy, call Margaret Walsh. She remembers you. Margaret Walsh, Superior Court Judge. The name sounded familiar, though I couldn't quite place it. I had no idea what was coming next. I decided to visit Patricia one more time before the legal war truly began. Maybe, just maybe, I could make her understand what she was doing to our family. Their house was everything mine wasn't: modern, cold, impressive. I noticed she'd redecorated again since Robert's funeral. New furniture, new art, all likely paid for with money they'd borrowed from us over the years. Mom, what a surprise, Patricia said when she opened the door, though her tone made it clear it wasn't a pleasant one. Michael's at work. Good, I thought. This conversation needed to happen between mother and daughter. I sat in their pristine living room, accepting the coffee she offered more out of politeness than desire. Patricia, we need to talk about this lawsuit, I said. There's nothing to discuss, she replied coolly. You're sick, Mom, even if you can't see it. This legal action is for your own protection. I'm not sick, sweetheart. I'm grieving. I'm adjusting. But I'm not incompetent. She sat across from me, her expression a mix of pity and frustration. Mom, she said softly, yesterday you called me asking how to transfer money between accounts. Last week, you couldn't figure out how to pay bills online. These aren't normal aging issues, Mom, Patricia said. I studied my daughter's face, Robert's stubborn jaw, my own green eyes. When had she become so calculating? Patricia, what if I told you I've been pretending? She blinked. Pretending what? Pretending to be helpless. Pretending to need help with things I understand perfectly well. For a moment, uncertainty flickered across her features. Then she shook her head. Mom, that doesn't make any sense. Why would you pretend to be confused? Because people treat you differently when they think you're weak, I said softly. They tell you things they'd never say to someone they see as a threat. Patricia laughed sharply. A threat, you? Mom, you're 65 years old. You haven't worked outside the home in 30 years. What kind of threat could you possibly be? I stood, smoothing my skirt. The kind you're about to find out about. What's that supposed to mean? I paused at their front door, my hand resting on the brass handle Robert had admired when we helped them buy this house. It means, Patricia, that you and Michael have made a very serious miscalculation about who you're dealing with, Mom. You're scaring me now. This paranoid talk is exactly why we filed the petition. I turned back to her one last time. I love you, Patricia. I always will. But I won't let you or anyone else steal what your father worked his entire life to build. Driving home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Not fear, not sadness, but anticipation. Patricia thought she was hunting a rabbit. She was about to discover she'd cornered a wolf that evening. I finally made the phone call I'd been putting off. The number on Margaret Walsh's business card rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Judge Walsh's chambers, this is Dorothy Hamilton. I'd like to speak with Margaret about a case coming before her court. There was a pause. Dorothy Hamilton. As in Dorothy Mitchell Hamilton? Yes, please hold. Another pause longer this time. Then, Dorothy. My God, is it really you? Little did they know, I had been preparing for this moment my entire life. Margaret, I said. 30 years of memories flooding back. It's really me, Dorothy Mitchell. I should have realized when I saw the name on the docket, Hamilton versus Hamilton. Your daughter's suing you? I could hear the disbelief in her voice. Margaret Walsh had been Margaret O'Brien back when we were in law school together at Harvard. We'd studied side by side, competed fiercely, and graduated in the same class of 1982. She thinks I'm an incompetent old woman who stumbled into a fortune, I said. She has no idea who I used to be, Margaret laughed. The same bright laugh I remembered from decades ago. Dorothy the Destroyer Mitchell incompetent? That's rich. Do you remember the Hartwell case? You eviscerated 3 expert witnesses in one afternoon. I smiled faintly. I did remember. It had been my biggest case before I retired, before I met Robert, before I became just Mom. Margaret, I said, I need to ask you something. Can you ethically hear this case, given our history? We were colleagues, not close friends, she replied. It's been decades since we've spoken. But Dorothy, if you're planning what I think you're planning, I'm not planning anything. I interrupted. Except defending myself against false accusations, with representation, I hope? I glanced at Robert's photo on the mantel. I'll represent myself. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Dorothy, you've been out of practice for 30 years. Law has changed. Are you sure you want to do this? I've kept my license active. I've been reading case law, following the changes in procedure. Old habits die hard. Your daughter's attorney is James Morrison, she warned. He's good. Experienced in elder law, I know, I said. I've been researching him since the day I received the lawsuit. He's won 80% of his competency cases. He specializes in families trying to declare their elderly relatives unfit to control their assets. You realize what you're walking into? I stood and walked into my study surrounded by the law books I'd never thrown away. The old case files I'd annotated long after I stopped practicing. Margaret, do you remember what Professor Williams used to say? She laughed softly. Never let them see you coming. Exactly after we hung up, I spent the evening reviewing my old files, cases I'd won, strategies I'd perfected. The methodical preparation that had once made me one of the most feared attorneys on the East Coast. Patricia thought she was dealing with a helpless widow. Tomorrow, she'd discover she was facing Dorothy Mitchell, the woman who hadn't lost a case in 15 years of practice. The woman who had walked away from law to raise her daughter, only to have that same daughter try to destroy her. I pulled out a yellow legal pad and began making notes, the familiar rhythm of building a defense coming back like muscle memory. Patricia's entire case depended on one thing, that I was mentally incompetent. But competency isn't about age or confusion. It's about understanding the nature and consequences of your decisions. And I understood exactly what I was doing. Morrison had made one crucial mistake in his petition. He'd claimed I'd been manipulated, suggesting that unknown parties had influenced me to forge Robert's will. But Robert's will had been witnessed by 3 people and notarized. The signatures had already been verified by handwriting experts. So where, exactly, was this supposed forgery? I smiled and made another note. Morrison was fishing, hoping I'd panic, accept a settlement, and save him the trouble of proving anything. He was counting on me being overwhelmed by legal jargon, frightened by the process, and too old to fight back. Tomorrow would change everything. The morning of our first court appearance, I dressed carefully, not in the designer suits Patricia expected, but in my old navy dress and sensible shoes. Let them think what they wanted. Patricia and Michael arrived looking confident. Morrison had clearly told them this would be simple, a routine hearing. Before the competency evaluation, I sat alone at the defendant's table. No attorney beside me. No briefcase full of documents. Just an old woman with a worn handbag. Exactly what they expected to see. When Judge Walsh entered, I glanced toward Patricia, curious if she'd recognize her. Nothing. Margaret had changed over the years to her red hair now silver. Her freckles faded, but her sharp blue eyes were exactly the same. Your Honor, Morrison began, standing with practiced authority. This is a straightforward case of financial elder abuse and potential fraud, Mrs. Hamilton. The defendant has been left a substantial inheritance under questionable circumstances. I listened as he painted his picture of me: confused, vulnerable, easily manipulated. According to him, I'd somehow managed to forge my own husband's will despite having no knowledge of law or estate procedure. The plaintiff requests an immediate competency evaluation and temporary conservatorship. Morrison continued to protect Mrs. Hamilton's assets from further mismanagement. Judge Walsh turned to me. Mrs. Hamilton, you're representing yourself in this matter? I stood slowly, playing the part they expected. Yes, Your Honor, I couldn't afford an attorney. Patricia actually smirked at that. Do you understand the nature of these proceedings? I believe so, Your Honor. My daughter thinks I'm not smart enough to manage money. Morrison objected. Your Honor, that oversimplifies serious allegations of mental incompetence and fraud. Sustained. Judge Walsh said. Mrs. Hamilton, do you understand that the court is being asked to determine whether you have the mental capacity to manage your financial affairs? Yes, Your Honor. And do you wish to contest these allegations? I looked directly at Patricia for the first time that day. Yes, Your Honor, I do. Judge Walsh made some notes. Mr. Morrison, I've reviewed your petition. You're alleging that Mrs. Hamilton forged her deceased husband's will? Not exactly forged, Your Honor, Morrison said quickly, but was manipulated into believing she was entitled to an inheritance that should rightfully go to the children. I see. And do you have evidence of this manipulation? Morrison hesitated. We believe the evidence will emerge during the competency evaluation. Your Honor, I stood again. Your Honor, may I ask a question? Judge Walsh Margaret nodded. Double quotes Mr. Morrison. You claim I was manipulated into forging my husband's will, but the will was properly witnessed, notarized, and filed. Are you suggesting the witnesses and notary were also manipulated? Morrison's expression tightened. Your Honor, Mrs. Hamilton lacks the legal knowledge to understand the complexities of this case. Actually, I said quietly, I understand perfectly. You're hoping the court will declare me incompetent based on my age and gender, without any actual evidence of mental incapacity or fraud. Isn't that right, Mr. Morrison? The courtroom went completely silent. Patricia stared at me, wide-eyed. Furthermore, I continued, Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 190B requires clear and convincing evidence of incapacity. You've provided character testimony and speculation, but no medical evaluation, no psychological assessment, and no concrete proof of any kind. Morrison shot to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. Mrs. Hamilton is clearly being coached. Judge Walsh raised an eyebrow. By whom, Mr. Morrison? She's representing herself. That was my moment. I decided it was time to stop pretending. I straightened my shoulders, letting 30 years of careful disguise fall away like an old coat. Your Honor, I said evenly, I'd like to present my credentials to the court. I reached into my handbag and pulled out my Massachusetts Bar Association card. Current and valid. Dorothy Mitchell Hamilton, member of the Massachusetts Bar since 1982. License number 847,293. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Patricia's mouth fell open. Michael grabbed her arm, whispering frantically. Morrison looked as though he'd been slapped. Judge Walsh examined my credentials with a neutral expression that didn't quite hide her amusement. Mrs. Hamilton, why didn't you mention your legal background earlier? Because, Your Honor, I said calmly, I wanted to see exactly what accusations Mr. Morrison would make against someone he assumed was legally ignorant. Then I turned to Morrison. You've spent the last 20 minutes arguing that I lack the mental capacity to understand simple financial matters. Yet you never bothered to research my background. Morrison finally found his voice. Your Honor, this changes nothing, Morrison insisted. Mrs. Hamilton hasn't practiced law in decades. She's clearly been manipulated. By whom? I asked. My dead husband. I took a step toward the center of the courtroom. You keep mentioning these mysterious manipulators, but you've never actually identified them. As I spoke, the familiar confidence of my old courtroom days returned. Your Honor, I practiced criminal defense law for 15 years. I specialized in complex fraud cases. I understand estate planning, trust law, and financial management better than most people in this room. Patricia finally spoke, her voice trembling. Mom, you never told me you were a lawyer. I looked at my daughter with a mixture of sadness and disappointment. You never asked, Patricia. In 30 years, you never once asked about my life before I married your father. Morrison was scrambling now. Your Honor, regardless of Mrs. Hamilton's past career, the evidence shows recent signs of mental decline. What evidence? I challenged. That I asked my granddaughter to help me with Netflix? That I got lost driving to Patricia's house during road construction? Mr. Morrison, if technical difficulties and traffic detours are signs of dementia, then half the population over 50 should be declared incompetent. Judge Walsh leaned forward. Mr. Morrison, do you have any medical evidence of mental incapacity? We request a full neurological evaluation, Morrison said. Based on what medical grounds? He fumbled through his papers, clearly unprepared for this turn. Based on behavioral observations from family members, I almost laughed. Your Honor, my daughter observed me asking for help with tasks I was perfectly capable of handling myself. I wanted to see how they'd treat someone they perceived as helpless. Judge Walsh raised an eyebrow. And what did you discover, Mrs. Hamilton? I turned to Patricia, meeting her eyes. I discovered that my own daughter sees me as an obstacle to her inheritance, not as a person deserving of respect. Morrison made one last desperate attempt. Your Honor, Mrs. Hamilton clearly orchestrated this entire scenario to make her daughter appear greedy. Judge Walsh's expression hardened. Mr. Morrison, are you suggesting that Mrs. Hamilton manipulated your client into filing a frivolous lawsuit? The trap was closing and Morrison was walking right into it. During the recess, I watched Patricia and Michael huddled with Morrison in the hallway. Patricia kept glancing toward me through the glass doors, her face a mixture of shock and something that might have been fear. Michael was pacing, phone pressed to his ear. I caught fragments of his conversation, much more complicated than we thought, and need to reassess our position. They'd built their entire case on the assumption that I was a simple, aging housewife who'd somehow stumbled into wealth. Now they were scrambling to understand who they were really dealing with. Morrison approached me during the break, his earlier confidence replaced by cautious respect. Mrs. Hamilton, perhaps we could discuss a settlement. What kind of settlement, Mr. Morrison? Your daughter is willing to withdraw the competency petition in exchange for a more equitable distribution of the estate. I almost smiled. You mean Patricia wants her inheritance after all? Mrs. Hamilton, surely you understand your daughter's position, he said. She expected to inherit something significant from her father, Mr. Morrison. My daughter did inherit something significant from her father: love, education, and every opportunity to build a good life. The fact that she took those gifts for granted doesn't entitle her to his money. But $62 million is a substantial sum for one person to manage alone. I tilted my head. Are you questioning my mental capacity again, Mr. Morrison? Because I should warn you, that didn't work out well for you in there for the first time. Morrison's professional mask slipped. Mrs. Hamilton, I'll be frank. My clients are reconsidering their approach. They'd prefer to resolve this privately. I'm sure they would. I gathered my purse. But we're past the point of private resolution. Your clients made this public when they filed papers claiming I was mentally incompetent. Now they can face the consequences of their accusations. When court reconvened, Morrison requested a continuance to reassess the evidence. Judge Walsh denied it immediately. Mr. Morrison, you filed this petition claiming urgency due to Mrs. Hamilton's alleged mental state. You can't now claim you need more time to build your case. Patricia took the stand as their primary witness. I watched her struggle to reconcile the mother she thought she knew with the woman who had just outmaneuvered her attorney. Mrs. Brooks, Morrison began. Please describe your mother's behavior following your father's death. Patricia's voice was uncertain. She seemed confused about financial matters. She asked me questions about banking, about investments. Did these questions concern you? At the time, yes. But now I'm wondering if. She trailed off, glancing at me. If what, Mrs. Brooks? Morrison prompted, if she was testing me somehow. Morrison looked like he wanted to object to his own witness. Mrs. Brooks, do you still believe your mother lacks the capacity to manage her financial affairs? Patricia was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. I don't know anymore. The foundation of their entire case was crumbling right there in front of everyone. That evening, Patricia called me at home. Her voice was different, smaller, softer, like the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. Mom, we need to talk. I'm listening. Why didn't you ever tell me you were a lawyer? Why didn't you tell me about your career? I sat in Robert's study, surrounded by the law books I'd never had the heart to donate. Because when you were born, you became more important than any career. I wanted to be your mother, not your lawyer, but you gave up everything for me. No, sweetheart, I said gently. I chose you. There's a difference. Patricia started to cry. I'm sorry, Mom, I'm so sorry. Michael said you didn't understand money, that you'd lose everything Dad worked for. And I believed him. You believed him because you wanted to, I said quietly. It was easier to think I was incompetent than to consider that your father made a conscious choice. Her voice broke. Why didn't Dad leave me anything? What did I do wrong? The pain in her question tore at me, but she needed to hear the truth. Patricia, your father loved you deeply. But he also saw how you and Michael treated money. You borrowed without paying back. You spent without thinking. He knew giving you millions would only enable that behavior. So he punished me by giving it all to you? No, I said softly. He trusted me to make the right decisions for our family's future, including decisions about you and Michael. There was a long silence. What does that mean? She asked. It means the money was never the point, Patricia. The point was to teach you that love isn't measured in dollars and that respect isn't optional. Just because someone seems vulnerable, Mom. Can we fix this? Can we drop the lawsuit and start over? I closed my eyes, feeling a wave of exhaustion. Patricia, tomorrow Michael is going to ask you to keep fighting. He'll tell you I manipulated everything, that I made you look foolish on purpose. How do you know that? Because I've watched him for 7 years of marriage to my daughter, I said. Michael sees dollar signs, not family. The question is, what are you going to choose? The line went quiet except for Patricia's soft sobbing. I love you, Mom, I love you too, sweetheart, I said gently. But love isn't enough anymore. We need respect, honesty, and trust. Until you're ready to give me those things, we can't move forward. After I hung up, I sat for a long time, wondering if I'd been too harsh. But 30 years of enabling Patricia's entitlement had brought us to this moment. Sometimes love meant setting boundaries, even when it broke your heart. The next morning brought a surprise. Patricia arrived at court alone. She looked exhausted, as if she hadn't slept at all. 20 minutes later, Michael walked in with a different lawyer, a younger, more aggressive man named David Chen. He'd escalated instead of backing down. Chen immediately requested a sidebar with Judge Walsh. I couldn't hear the conversation. But Morrison looked uneasy while Chen gestured wildly. When they returned, Chen announced a new strategy. Your Honor, we're amending our petition. We now allege that Mrs. Hamilton deliberately deceived her family about her mental state in order to manipulate them into filing this lawsuit, proving she's unfit to manage a substantial estate. It was clever, in a twisted sort of way. Instead of claiming I was incompetent, they were claiming I was too manipulative. Judge Walsh looked skeptical. Mr. Chen, you're arguing that Mrs. Hamilton is both mentally unfit and cunning enough to orchestrate an elaborate legal trap. We're arguing, Chen replied, that her behavior shows a concerning disconnect from reality and relationships. I stood. Your Honor, may I respond to this new theory? Proceed, Mrs. Hamilton. Mr. Chen seems to be arguing that defending myself against false accusations proves I'm unfit to defend myself. That's circular logic at its finest, Chen shot back. Mrs. Hamilton deliberately misled her family about her capabilities, then used their natural concern against them. Natural concern? I let my voice carry across the courtroom. Mr. Chen, my daughter and son-in-law didn't express concern for my well-being. They expressed concern for their inheritance. There's a significant difference. I turned toward Patricia, who flinched slightly at my words. If Patricia had called and said, Mom, I'm worried about you. Can we get you a medical checkup? That would have been concern. If she'd said, Mom, let me help you organize your finances, that would have been support. Instead, she filed legal papers declaring me mentally incompetent without ever speaking to my doctor, my friends, or anyone who actually sees me day to day. Judge Walsh nodded slightly. Mr. Chen, do you have any medical evidence supporting claims of mental unfitness? Chen hesitated. We have family testimony about concerning behaviors. That day, Chen was running out of steam. Behaviors that Mrs. Hamilton has now explained as deliberate tests of her family's character. He said weakly, or intelligent and cautious. Judge Walsh replied dryly. You could see the moment Chen realized his argument was crumbling. Patricia stared down at the floor and Michael's face flushed with anger. That's when I decided it was time. Your Honor, I said, rising to my feet. I'd like to present additional evidence to the court. I reached into my handbag and pulled out a manila folder I'd been saving for this exact moment. These are financial records showing every penny Patricia and Michael have borrowed from my husband and me over the past 7 years. Chen immediately jumped up. Objection, Your Honor. This evidence wasn't disclosed during discovery. Judge Walsh gave a small, amused smile. Mr. Chen, Mrs. Hamilton is representing herself. The rules of evidence are somewhat relaxed for pro se litigants, especially when responding to an amended petition filed the day of trial. I handed the copies to the clerk. Your Honor, this shows a pattern of financial dependence totaling over $200,000. None of it was ever repaid. Patricia went pale. Michael grabbed her arm and whispered something urgently, and furthermore, I continued. I have here a recording of a conversation between Patricia and Michael from last month, where they discussed having me declared incompetent, so they could finally get control of Mom's money. The courtroom exploded. Chen shouted objections, Michael shot to his feet, and Patricia looked like she might faint. Judge Walsh slammed her gavel. Order, Mr. Chen, I'll hear your objection, Your Honor. This recording was obtained without consent. It's inadmissible. I smiled. Actually, Mr. Chen, Massachusetts is a one-party consent state for recordings. Since the conversation took place in my home, with my knowledge and consent, it's perfectly admissible. Chen's voice grew desperate. This is clearly a setup. Yes, I said evenly. It absolutely was. I created a situation where my daughter and son-in-law revealed their true intentions just like I let them assume. I was incompetent to expose their prejudices. Judge Walsh leaned forward. Mrs. Hamilton, are you saying you planned all of this? Yes, Your Honor. My husband warned me years ago that Patricia and Michael might challenge my inheritance. So I prepared. I hoped I was wrong about them. I turned to Patricia, tears streaming down her face. I really hoped you'd prove me wrong. The judge reviewed the financial records and listened to portions of the recording. When she finished, her expression was stern. Mr. Chen, she said, I'm denying your petition in its entirety. Mrs. Hamilton has demonstrated exceptional mental acuity and legal understanding. More importantly, she's exposed the real motivation behind this lawsuit. Then she turned to Patricia and Michael. Mrs. Brooks, Mr. Brooks, this court finds that you filed this case not out of concern for Mrs. Hamilton's welfare, but as an attempt to gain control of assets you believed you were entitled to. That constitutes harassment and potentially fraud. Michael stood up, his voice shaking. Your Honor, we were genuinely concerned about Mrs. Hamilton's mental state. Judge Walsh's face could have frozen water. Mr. Brooks, I just listened to a recording of you saying, and I quote, once the old bat is declared incompetent, we can finally live the lifestyle we deserve. The courtroom went dead silent. Mrs. Hamilton, Judge Walsh said finally, not only are you competent to manage your affairs, you're one of the most capable individuals I've seen in this courtroom. Case dismissed. As Patricia and Michael left with their lawyers, Patricia turned back once. Mom, I'm sorry, I nodded. I know you are, sweetheart. But sorry isn't enough anymore. 6 months later, I sold the big house and moved into a small cottage by the ocean. Patricia calls sometimes, and we're slowly rebuilding our relationship, this time with honesty, respect, and boundaries. I donated half of Robert's money to legal aid organizations that help elderly people fight financial abuse. The irony wasn't lost on me. The other half? It's funding a peaceful, comfortable retirement for a woman who's spent 30 years pretending to be helpless, only to discover she was stronger than she ever imagined. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.